Like, let's say you're with somebody new and you haven't been sexually active yet. How do you talk to your partner about the fact that you have a sexually transmitted disease without feeling a ton of shame around that?
Did you push record?
Thank you so much for tuning in again to our second act with Paige and Silka. I'm happy to say that Bonnie Gayle stayed over for another segment on our series of dealing with sexual shame. Bonnie, thanks for joining us again.
Thank you.
Well, if you missed our previous segment, we will link to that. We discussed really, in taking charge of your sexual health and wanting to have the best sex ever after 50, that lots of us, well, probably the majority of people deal with shame just because of history, religion, etc., etc. What we want to talk about today is some specific shame as it relates to sex. And as we encourage sexual behavior after 50, I think it's important that we also encourage safe sex. Bonnie, talk about that.
Absolutely. Did you know that like people over 50 are the biggest percentage of people that are contacting diseases right now, sexually transmitted diseases?
Yeah.
And so there is a lot of shame around having a sexually transmitted disease or infection. And the thing is like, how do you talk to your partner? Like, let's say you're with somebody new and you haven't been sexually active yet. How do you talk to your partner about the fact that you have a sexually transmitted disease without feeling a ton of shame around that,
That would be really difficult. I know that would be really difficult for me.
Well, and here are the numbers. 1 in 4 people has a sexually transmitted disease. So we're not talking about a rare thing here. That's 1 in 4. So you have 4 people in a room. 1 in 4, the odds are, has a sexually transmitted disease.
What specifically?
Well, I mean, okay, so you could have herpes, you could have genital herpes, you could have HIV or AIDS, but you could have HPV. There's like so many different things that you could get. And the thing is like, it's all about taking care of yourself. So first of all, we have to know that we have something. So what do we need to, so this is the first thing is we should always protect ourselves. So I always suggest using condoms for sex. Understand that if you are performing oral sex, sexually transmitted diseases do get contacted and contracted in that way. So, deciding what you want to do about that. Okay, but so using condoms, using lubricants that are antifungal, that are antibacterial, so that you keep the area safe and so that it stays in the correct pH balance. If your vagina, if your penis is in the correct pH balance, you will not contract or contact disease. That's how it works.
That's interesting. I don't think I knew that.
Because
well, I
when
always say I
things are
learn
in
something
the
new every day.
proper balance, they don't mutate.
Okay.
So it's really important. That's why, like understanding that every part of your body has different pH. That's normal. Like the vagina is 3.5 to 4. That's normal pH for the vagina. So if you become more alkaline than 4, then you start to get where you are more able to contract diseases. Or if you are more acidic than 3.5, then you are more able to contract diseases.
Very interesting. I have never had it explained like that. We'll have to. I'm going to have to throw that to Dr. Lori too. That would be. I think that deserves a whole other segment.
So yeah, and I think it's important to be honest with whomever you're going to be sexually active with. You could say, I have blah blah blah, and it, like for instance, if it's not active, as long as we use a condom and we use, a good lube, we're not going to have any issues, but being honest about it, sexually transmitted diseases and infections, like what if you were married and you got it from your husband? Like, what about that is shameful for you? It doesn't mean that you did anything wrong.
Well, maybe your husband did.
Right, but so that's the whole thing is like not taking on the fact that somebody else gave that to you. You know what I mean? Like not taking it on like, oh, woe is me. Like I'm bad because I did that. If you don't have bad feelings about it when you're talking about it, you don't blow it up and make a big deal over it. And people take it better.
Yeah.
You know, like the more dramatic and traumatic you get about something when you talk about it, the more they take that in.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. We had a viewer comment on one of our past videos, Bonnie. I believe it was the one I did with you. I think I sent it to you. And this woman, very well educated, big time on safe sex after 50. She gave some really good advice, but I wondered, how practical it really is. I mean, she literally would request, or she said she does, blood tests from men before she's going to sleep with them. Is that going overboard? Is it smart? What?
Well, if you're sexually active with a lot of different people, I think it's intelligent. I mean, look, the reality is that if you've had sex within the last 6 months, that, all of that may or may not get captured in that test, right? But if you've had a disease for a long period of time, or that's going to show up. So the thing is like just wanting to know. I had one man that I have been with in my entire life who required me to get tested. And I did get tested. And, I wasn't really offended by it. What I was offended by was that he was like hounding me to go do it. It was like, well, it was like once he let me know that he wanted me to go do this, it was like every conversation seemed to be around that. And I was like, wait a minute, this is a little ridiculous.
So it goes back to how you handle it when you
Yeah.
ask somebody for this information.
Exactly. Like, I don't think that that's a horrible thing to ask of somebody. Now, the odds are they could say yes and they could say no. And if they say no, then you need to stick to your guns if that's something that's important to you.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing I know that in conversations with friends and, just in context with the show, I think our generation, condom use was not prevalent when we were young. I mean,
right.
It's
because if you grew up and you were having sex like in the 60s and 70s,
80s,
right?
Yeah.
In the 80s, HIV first came out.
That's when it started, the condom.
Like early 80s. So if you were having sex in the 60s or 70s, it was all about free love.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like people weren't like, oh, we need to wear a condom, and there was a lot of multiple partner sex at that time too, with all the free love.
Right.
So you could have something from way back then that never actually showed up.
Do you think our attitude towards condoms, that we've carried that forward, and maybe that's one of the reasons that the STDs are so prevalent among 50 and over now? Could that have something to do with it? Not that that's really important, but I'm just wondering if our mind...
Because I think that, people think of using condoms as birth control. So if you think of it as for birth control, then before you think you're going to get pregnant, you don't use it. And then once you can't get pregnant anymore. See, that's what's happening is there's this whole generation of people who can't get pregnant anymore. So now they're not using condoms. And guess where it's happening? In old age homes. They're getting STDs. That's so funny to me. But it's happening because they're not using condoms and they're having sex.
Yeah. Well, the good news is we have a lot to look forward to. Oh, Bonnie, that's funny. Well, Bonnie, we're starting to come to an end of this segment. What are some important last-minute tips that you'd like to leave our audience with?
So if you are sexually active with multiple partners, to get tested regularly and to make sure that, you use condoms and you use a good lube that keeps the area's pH balanced, and enjoy yourselves. Also, and the last thing is, if you have an STD and you're with somebody new, it's important that you share that with that person before you are sexually active with them.
Bonnie, thank you. We will, as always, link to all of your information. Bonnie would love it if you reached out to her directly. We will, again, have her contact information. And we'll see you in our next segment of Our Second Act with Paige and Silka. Bye-bye. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you found this information helpful. For more information about taking charge of your sexual health after 50, please visit our website, secondact.tv. And if you haven't already done so, take just one quick second and subscribe to our channel. Button's right over here.